Hello everyone and welcome to a recorded session of TSSS 701. So due to the fact that during our live I received a complaint that the slides were not visible, so I've decided to do a canned version, a recorded version of the same lesson. And because of bandwidth, I'm going to stop my video to give you guys the benefit so that we don't have any issues of not being able to hear or see the slides. So I hope you don't mind. Okay, so this lesson concentrates on South Africa and the social science curriculum. We look at the definition of social science in the CAPS curriculum, and this looks at history and geography, and it goes as saying that both should be taught and assessed every term of the school year. These two disciplines are to be kept separate, but the curriculum is designed to complement the knowledge, contents, and skills and concepts outlined in each. So what this in essence means is that the social science curriculum is designed in such a way that history and geography have complementing topics, and they built up in such a way that during in the senior phase 7, 8, and 9, these topics complement each other, and even the skills the outcomes of skills match each other for history and geography. It also means that at the end of a term or end of semester, the marks are integrated, which means that instead of getting a separate mark for history and geography, this mark is combined and learners then have just a mark for social sciences. Okay, so before we actually go into the social sciences itself, it's important to see where we've come from as far as our education system is concerned. So South African education has a long history and different education systems, all with different aims from pre-colonial times to the present. So the first system was introduced in pre-colonial period, which was the African, what I refer to as the African education, with the aims of entrenching African values on children. And after this, I'll go into a bit more detail on each of these systems. Then in 1737, missionary education, which was linked to Christian national education, was established to entrench colonial values of Christianity and Westernization. With the emergence of the new democratic dispensation in 1994, the state introduced the outcomes-based education, which was referred to as OBE, and then revised national curriculum and curriculum assessment policy statement, which is known as CAPS, in order to eradicate the values of apartheid in the education system. So this shows that historically South Africa has used the education system to deal with certain concerns the country find as not fitting for the government at that time. So let's start with the first education system, right? This is just I'm giving you a brief outline of each one of them, right? So the first education system South Africa had was Indigenous African education, which was the education that was both formal and informal. The educational practices were through the transmission of indigenous knowledge from the adult to the child, and it was practiced by the indigenous people of South Africa at the time, which was the Khoi and the San, and later the Bantu-speaking people who were here before the arrival of the settlers in the Cape Colony in 1652. So the curriculum of the indigenous people consisted of traditions, legends, and tales, and the procedures and knowledge associated with rituals, which were handed down orally from generation to generation within each ethnic group. So children learned about working, hunting, rituals, and other cultural traits such as trance, dancing, herding, and the manufacturing of equipment. They learned this from older members of their clans through experience and by completing tasks such as gathering and preparing food. Then colonization took place and South Africa was conquered by Britain, and they introduced the missionary education, which was the second type of education system that South Africa had. It was established by the colonial British government in South Africa as a way of spreading their language and traditions in the colony, and also as a means of social control. As a result, colleges of education in the Cape Colony were established, such as Lovedale and the University College of Fort Hare under the British rule. Missionary schools were also established, which included St. Matthew's, Clogbury, and other missionary schools. I think Inanda Seminary here in Durban, where these schools were used to promote the British culture. So the main aim of missionary education was to make Africans easily manageable and provide labor, and to make sure that Africans did not rebel against the rule of the British. Another reason was to force Africans to also contribute to the revenue of the British colony. And this is, one example how education has certain political aims for those who consume it. So the third type of education in South African history was the Christian national education, and this was based on or Christian principles, but with the Afrikaner people, it was more characterized towards Protestant Christian principles, and was designed in such a manner that it would suit the children, the culture of the children intended to, and that was the Afrikaner children. The key principles of Christian national education, according to Eden and Vermeulen, was the instruction and the education of the children of European parents should be based on their parents' life view of the world, which will have a Christian foundation and are based on the Holy Scripture, which is the Bible. Under the national principle, one should love their country, language, history, and culture, and education should be conducted through the means of religious instruction. So within this type of education, there was no double medium schools. All groupings in South Africa should be separately accommodated. Education to colored and African people was regarded as subdivisions of the vocational tasks of the Afrikaans speaking people, and to basically to Christianize them and to spread the language or the Afrikaans language to the people, the indigenous people. So from the above principles of Christian national education, it is safe to say that it promoted Afrikaner nationalism through education. For instance, the education system, Christian national education, promptly stated that Europeans as receivers of this type of education should love their country, history, language, and culture. The country they're referring to is the one that is ruled by Afrikaners, who will then impose their language on the natives of this country. The last principle of Christian national education confirms that the Afrikaner ruling party was using education to Christianize the people. Right, so that's the last one that I mentioned. Education on Black people was also based on the Europeans' attitude to life and to the world as such. The fourth education system was the outcomes-based education system, and this education system was based on two important bases. One is that the fact that the previous education system did not meet international standards, firstly because it was racist, and the secondly is because it was not democratic. For OBE, the most important aspects were the outcomes that learners could reap from the education they were getting. And by outcomes, they meant having ideas, knowing how to make decisions, and how to solve problems. These outcomes enable learners to be equipped in life and to find employment. This was the result of OBE, and it was relevant, especially considering that South Africa had just got international sanctions lifted in 1994, and many work opportunities which were previously not open for Black people were open, and they needed the skills to access these opportunities. But like any other system, there were shortfalls in OBE. And some of it was basically its jargon or its terminology was very difficult. Secondly, it did not provide sufficient time for development of effective reading skills. And thirdly, the teachers were not properly trained to implement the curriculum. As a result, the curriculum was to be streamlined, and the Department of Education took it under review. Because of this, the revised national curriculum, which was called the RNCS, came into being, and this curriculum system ran from grade R to grade 9, and it built on the vision and values of the Constitution and the revised curriculum, which was known, when they revised it, it was known as Curriculum 2005. So these principles included social justice, a healthy environment, human rights, and inclusivity. And also it included some principles of outcomes-based education. So by learning social sciences according to this new curriculum, RNCS, learners were made aware of global issues. It introduced them to learning material that required critical thinking and to learn to have a holistic view of the world. The benefits included learners having higher order thinking abilities and skills such as comprehension, application, analysis, evaluation and synthesis, and creativity in students. So learners were also exposed or are exposed to a variety of topics such as natural resources, water resources, communication, caste system, political ideologies, social reformers, to our culture, to the United Nations, and this is just to mention a few. Students were also given a chance to gain appropriate information and data in various contexts. For example, in order to investigate poverty in the society, students require knowledge of subjects such as history, economics, and politics. And as you know, social science is a combination of many other disciplines. So the purpose of social science in South Africa, according to the curriculum assessment policy, is to provide learners with opportunities to look at their world with a critical outlook. The policy document also aims to introduce learners into worlds beyond their everyday realities. The purpose of social science is also highlighted where it develops learners' literacy and also makes them effective citizens of a country so they could participate as effective citizens of our country. In South Africa, social science education will be made through the teaching of in-depth knowledge, through in-depth teaching, and learners will be trained to speculate, to debate, to make connections, to select, to prioritize, and to persist in tackling real issues and important questions, right? And this was taken from Curriculum Assessment Policy 2011. Social science also has the purpose of introducing learners to their country's politics and its operations. And this is not to say that we want learners to be motivated to get into politics, but we introduce them to topics such as democracy and citizenship in South Africa and to nationalism because such topics give them a basic understanding of politics and the history in South Africa. And also, it basically is needed to as they need it as future citizens of the country because they basically participate in later in the politics of their country. And so it's designed in a way that it helps them participate meaningfully in as citizens and in the running of the country. Now, when it comes to curriculum, there are various definitions of curriculum. Taylor defines curriculum as a science, an extension of a school's philosophy, and feels that a curriculum should be based on students' needs and interests. He also argues that subject topics must be organized in terms of knowledge, skills, and values, which must be taught and acquired by the learners, and also that the purpose of the curriculum should be to transmit certain values to the learners in school. There are also various types of curriculums operating all around the world, right? Glasson, in his paper Curriculum for the 20th Century, describes 7 types of curriculums operating in schools. The first one he's called a recommended curriculum, which is one which is proposed by scholars and professional organizations, right? That is might not be in schools, but is proposed as a good curriculum. Then we have the written curriculum, the one that appears in schools, districts, and divisions or in country documents. We get the one that is taught, that means what teachers implement or deliver in the classroom. Sometimes, they don't deliver the whole curriculum the way it's supposed to be, or they deliver it according to, their way of thinking or the school's ethos, could impact on this. And then we get the supported curriculum, one which is, where the textbooks and the resources such as audiovisual materials and computers support the curriculum implementation of the curriculum. Now here again we'll go into textbooks, because textbooks also are written by people, and people obviously place their view when they write, or historians always have a view when they're writing. We have the assessed curriculum, that is which is tested and evaluated, right? That is something which again can differ from school to school. Then we have the learned curriculum, and this is very important, is what the learners or the students actually learn and what it is measured by. Then we have the hidden curriculum, that is the unintended curriculum, right? And this also has a lot to do with the politics and the ruling party, and we'll discuss this a little later on as we go on. Right. So when it comes to textbooks, and particularly history textbooks, right? The history textbooks basically foster values of the Constitution. And when I talk about values of the Constitution, I mentioned it earlier, things like democracy, social justice and equality, and here in our country, non-racism, non-sexism. We also include human dignity, which we know as Ubuntu. Also, our manifesto on values includes an open society, accountability, respect, rule of law, and also reconciliation. So the current grade 8 and grade 9 social science curriculum consists of content topics which foster the values that I've just mentioned now in our Constitution. For instance, in the grade 8 social science textbook, you'll find the topic, the Industrial Revolution in Britain and Southern Africa, 1860. And there are textbooks that acknowledge how it was that the wealth from the slave trade was one of the causes of the Industrial Revolution, right? So can you see the connection there? How, our Africa's contribution to industrial revolution, the Industrial Revolution benefited Britain in particular. So according to Lunda Kushley and Dumo in her paper, is the South African grade 8 and 9 social science curriculum promoting the democratic values of the South African Constitution, she claims that the cruelty committed to the African people by the Europeans is not included in the content in many of the textbooks. And she also mentions that neither are the effects of the slave trade affected the lives of the families or the people that were left behind. She also criticized some textbooks in the way that they did not really make a connection between these kind of topics and what is happening today, right? However, in this particular paper, the author acknowledges that this type of content would derail the efforts of the government in achieving reconciliation, and the process derailing our efforts of reaching our rainbow nation that the government was propagating. Then on the topic of further land disposition and the defeat of African kingdoms, the Xhosa in 1878 and the Pedi and the Zulu in 1879. The author looks at Ranbury and Johnson, and here she mentions that these kind of topics are sort of romanticized in textbooks, and not really given in a true historical way, and historical events are looked at in a way that it's I can't say washed over, but not for what it was. So now this tone of romanticizing history was used in the United States of America as well. And the reason for this was to normalize the political structure of the country. And in South Africa, it is also used to normalize the cruel treatment of Black people by the apartheid government. And I think that is something that, it's very important. It should be recognized, that these things happen. But, the way it's written down is obviously written in a way that is watered down to a certain effect. And that is just my opinion as well. and the opinion of the author the particular author I'm looking at. And then we look at geography textbooks, right? I look at the paper again by Linda Kushle Ndumo, and she also criticizes the grade 8 topics of, for example, social issues related to the rapid growth of cities. And, she mentions that authors look at these, authors of these textbooks mention that there are many people living in informal settlements, but she says that, or feels that this content is incomplete, right? Because the authors do not supplement the content with the history part of social sciences. That means the reasons they give for a large amount of people living in informal settlements, right? And they suggest that, it's a shortage of housing, lack of urban planning, and a large number of immigrants. However, they could have stated that one of the many reasons why such a huge shortage of houses and many people living in informal settlements is because of apartheid acts such as the Land Act of 1913 or the Allen Gray Act of 1894, right? So she feels there should be a greater link between what is happening in geography now and what happened in history. There should have been a link. And yeah, I agree, there's not much of a link between the two as far as the history of South Africa is concerned. Right? So, so according to these particular acts, right, that were mentioned, non-white people had to leave the land in which they were living for many years so that white people could live on that land. And also it prevented access and restriction of ownership to land by Black people. So it's, like I say, and I mentioned in the live, it is a, topic open to debate and something that we will debate further on and look at, and possibly maybe, if there's a discussion on textbooks, we can look at each textbook merits on its own and see if we have a general idea that, all history textbooks and geography textbooks have the same type of viewpoint on topics, that such as, the Zulu Wars and other topics of historical importance in South Africa. So according to, other researchers, integrating history and geography will enrich both the subject and will create more meaning to them. So obviously, I think with our syllabus, there needs to be a little bit more integrating to be done. But, it's important that learners also understand that, decisions that were taken at the time of democracy were taken in order for us to achieve our goals of a peaceful South Africa, right? I'm pretty sure that the government did not want anything to hamper that, and we want learners to take ownership of the concept of democracy, and and I'm sure that they thought it best to leave out content that will hamper this growth. So criticism of textbooks not linking the historical events to everyday lives in terms of how the learners are still affected by the choices which happened in the past, right? There are, some textbooks that I'm not going to mention the name, that defines apartheid and the impact that they had on the lives of the people at the time, right? But they don't, again, link the impact of apartheid laws on today's society. So this is another criticism of our textbooks. And again, I want to mention that this will not foster democracy, but it probably will have the adverse effect. Then, so basically that will be on the geography textbooks, right? I don't want to go too much into that right now. Like I say, we'll look at it with each on its own merit. Then moving forward, the concerns of the state, right? it's very important that we mention here, or I mention, that every government will obviously revisit textbooks and revisit how textbooks are portraying the government, and every government obviously wants their story be brought to the forefront. I think it was Winston Churchill that mentioned, and I quote, "History will be kind to me, for I will be the one that will be writing it." I don't know if that's the exact words, but it goes something like that, where he argues that he will not be portrayed as a villain in the history textbook, because you will be commissioning what is written in the textbooks at that particular time. And obviously, textbooks are rewritten and history is rewritten and relooked at all the time, and it's being looked at from different perspectives, and as time goes on, we find that different angles come into history, so it's always updating. So history does not stay the same. It's in the constant process of change. So when we argue that education in South Africa is based towards democratic citizenship, it does not mean that we are neglecting the nature of a learner's childhood or adulthood, right? It's rather concerned with our constitution's provision for every citizen. That means, the right to access, defend, and preserve individual liberties, and also to appeal to the public good. So in light of this, one can say that education in South Africa has taken a stance to achieve its political aspirations, rather than derailing the process that it desired. In social sciences, though, we do place a lot of emphasis on socializing the child into the existing culture, family norms and practices, and this view of socializing the child into culture is an old practice that was even mentioned by Plato, who claims that the state uses its political authority to educate the child to desire not as what is good for themselves, but for their society, so as to pursue the good of all. So what we're actually witnessing in South Africa's education is socializing our children into a culture of democratic values. The view that education in South Africa is not used to foster the desired citizens of the country, right, is shared by authors such as Nfrebelo and Matebelo, and they share the sentiments that South African schools, or the state schools, are political parents of all its school children from the ages of 7 to 18. And, by this they mean fostering good citizenship, right? As to, and the former head of state, Thabo Mbeki, call this a new type of patriotism. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys agree with this. Should we be educating our children into our culture, or should we be educating them to make decisions for themselves and decide for themselves what is what is good for them? I don't know, again, open to debate. Right, so to end off with, the vision of our South African Constitution is to create a society that is open, democratic, and that one that emphasizes dignity, justice, and equality. The values of the Constitution, which the RNCS is based on, include diversity, sovereignty, and patriotism. And I think we can safely say that the grade 8 and 9 social science curriculum does promote the values of our Constitution. And it is also supported by policies such as the white papers on education, CAPS, the manifesto on values, education and democracy. And, from here it's left for the educators to drive this process forward. And, they are encouraged to teach in a way, and you as future teachers, you're encouraged to teach in a way that promotes the values of the Constitution. And, I remember many years ago when I was in school, I had a history teacher who was not, I think, strictly adhering to the curriculum, if I remember clearly. And one day she just didn't pitch up to school, and we heard further down the line that she had been arrested. And she was teaching, teaching us stuff that we should have been taught, but wasn't exactly designed into the curriculum. So with that, people, I'll leave you guys on that note. And I hope this lesson was a lot clearer. And I do apologize for any inconvenience caused by that, you guys not seeing the slides. But I must tell you that the slides are also up on your ECI page. I placed it there on Thursday morning, so you should find the slides. And I hope now that this lesson is a lot clearer and that we can have more debate around this topic.